Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. And Happy New Year to you, Sap. Happy New Year to everybody else. I know it's January 5th, so there may be I think Larry David says you only have until the 3rd to wish people Happy New Year. So I'm breaking Larry David's rule there. But, it's our first show of the new year, so I figured it's only fair.
We needed a little leeway on that. We didn't do a show on the 3rd, the 2nd, or the 1st, so it's the 5th. I think the cutoff is extended for us.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I hope you had a nice Christmas and New Year's, Sap. I was with my in-laws and my wife in Spain, scouting out the European basketball talent. Making sure the Celtics are apprised on all the latest comings and goings of that league, so they can grab the next great European player who can knock down a half-court game winner against the Warriors, like a la Nikola Jokic.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jokic just never really misses any shots, so it's not a surprise that he would
What
hit
is he
a
said? He's
half-court shot.
missed 5 shots in his last 4 games or something like
He's
that total.
39 of 44 in his last 4 games. I mean, he's the best player in basketball. He may not be the MVP frontrunner because Joel Embiid, the reigning MVP, is having even a better year than he had last year. Embiid currently, Jet, is averaging more points per game than minutes per game, which has only been done a few times in the history of the league in terms of high-end scorers. Will Chamberlain um, averaged over 50 points per game one year, and he averaged 48 and a half minutes per game in that same season. So Embiid's having a Will Chamberlain type season if you stretch out his numbers in terms of points and minutes. But Jokic is still the best player in the league. Embiid, Giannis, go right on down the line. Those are the best players in basketball. But yeah, maybe the Celtics can get that big wing that they're looking for in Spain. Let's hope they add that, because I think that's the final piece to the puzzle for them to get over the top and win the championship.
Yeah, I think their bench could definitely use some upgrading here and there. I do think it's been better than what a lot of people were anticipating. Pritchard and Hauser have been pretty good. Hauser's streaky. He's great when he's on, and he can't do anything for you when he's off. And I think Pritchard, it took him about a month to figure out what his role was on the team, but he's been playing very well recently. But beyond that, they don't really have all that much. So yeah, a big wing will help them. But it's much more of a minor fix, I think, than what is facing two teams that we really want to talk about, Sap, which are the Lakers, your team, because your guy LeBron's on them, and the Golden State Warriors, who we just mentioned lost in a heartbreaker last night to the Denver Nuggets because of the greatness of Nikola Jokic. Both those teams under 500 right now, Sap. The Lakers would be the 10 seed and just making that play-in tournament. The Warriors are currently on the outside looking in, just a half a game back of the Lakers. Lakers 17 and 18, the Warriors 16 and 18. Obviously, these are two teams that were predicted to be well in the playoff picture in the West. And for the Lakers, I think a lot of people had them potentially coming out of the West and reaching the NBA Finals. And the Warriors obviously are just a year removed from winning the NBA Finals, and yet we're here now post Christmas and into the new year, and both those teams are really struggling to rack up the wins. So it's two teams that, believe it or not, we haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about yet this year, because we've been really talking about the surprise teams and the teams at the top like Minnesota, Boston, Milwaukee, and the teams that kind of have come a little bit out of nowhere like Oklahoma City, Orlando. But these are two, huge marquee franchises in the NBA, SAP, and the Lakers and the Warriors, and they're just at this point in the season, really, you can't even say middling. They're way below expectations.
So the Lakers won the in-season tournament, and since then they're 3-9. So maybe they were spent after winning the in-season tournament, because they did take that very seriously. But to go 3-9 over your next 12 games is a disaster, especially when one of those losses came against the San Antonio Spurs, who seem to win one game per month. I mean, the Lakers
Yeah, they're
can't lose
five
to
and
the San Antonio
29. The
Spurs.
Spurs.
If you're a real contender, you can't lose to the Spurs or the Pistons or Washington. Those are like the three teams you can't slip up on. You've got to take care of business against those teams. So that's an issue with the Lakers. And look, they've done this for the last 3 years, where they'll put together a really good month, and then they'll put together a really bad month, and then a good month, and then a bad month. And they end up, fighting their way in through the play-in tournament. And that's not really the way to go. Now, they're not as bad as they were a year ago, when they were 2-12 to start the season and then had to fight back to just get into the play-in. I think they'll be in better shape this year than they were last year. And if you told me that the first 2.5 months of the year you'd have Anthony Davis and LeBron James playing at the level that they're playing at and also playing as many games as they're playing in, I would say the Lakers should be, after 35 games, I don't know, 22 and 13, 23 and 12. Instead, they're 17 and 18. They're 5, 6 games below what I think they should be, considering how LeBron and Anthony Davis have played. A lot of it has to do with the fact that this team cannot shoot three-pointers. They're one of the worst, if not the worst, three-point shooting team in the league, and that's the way the league is going right now. Also, their secondary players just haven't stepped up, whether it's Austin Reeves, Hachimura's dealt with some injuries. I think what the Lakers really lack is that third player. It doesn't have to be a third superstar, but a clear, defined number 3 player, because then Reeves and Hachimura and the rest of those players, D'Angelo Russell, could slide down to being their 4th, 5th, and 6th best players. That'd be that much better for that. So we'll see what happens at the trade deadline. If they can add, I don't know, Zach LaVine or DeMar DeRozan, maybe that would put the Lakers back in true title contention.
Yeah, Lakers are in the bottom third in the league for 3-point percentage. Sap. I mean, and it's by very minuscule numbers. The worst 3-point shooting team in the league is the Memphis Grizzlies, which kind of makes sense if you look at their roster. But I see what you're saying, and I've been seeing a lot of criticism about the roster construction for the Lakers, and I actually don't think it's that bad of a roster construction. I get that they're not shooting threes well, but they got guys that you thought would shoot the ball better, like Gabe Vincent. I mean, God knows he couldn't miss in the Eastern Conference Finals. Sap, against the Celtics, he's been nothing for the Lakers this year. He's played in 5 games, so he's had no impact on the team. Partially because of injuries, and it's not like he was playing particularly well when he was playing. D'Angelo Russell, never really known as a 3-point shooter. Austin Reeves, I think people were expecting a bigger leap out of him this season, Sap. And so I wouldn't say, a guy who was, I believe he was undrafted, averaging 15 points a game and 5 assists is a letdown, because I think he's a very good basketball player. But I think people were expecting him to be a borderline all-star, and he's obviously nowhere near that. So now a lot of the criticism of why the Lakers aren't succeeding is falling on their head coach, Darvin Ham. And I think that this is more of a situation where this is just sort of how LeBron teams the past decade or so seem to go. Even when he was ending his tenure on the Cavs, like they seem to kind of struggle out of the gate, and then they really turn it on after the trade deadline. Usually there's either a big move or a big revamp of the roster, and they start playing a lot better. It happened last year, and I wouldn't be shocked if it happens again this year. I don't know what else Darvin Ham really could be doing. They have had some injuries, but I don't think he's doing a poor job coaching. Granted, I don't watch as much of the Lakers as you do, Sap, but he seems to be getting a lot of the flack.
Oh, absolutely. And that's always going to be the case with LeBron James, right? I mean, it's never going to be his fault. It's going to be the coach's fault or his teammates' fault. And look, I'm the biggest LeBron James supporter out there, but that's just the narrative. And it has been, like you said, Jet, pretty much for the last decade. When he went back to Cleveland for 4 years, he did make it to 4 straight finals. But even in those regular seasons, they would be the 2 or the 3 seed. And then they would get geared up for the postseason and then make their way through the Eastern Conference. Because quite frankly, there wasn't a team on their level that could beat them. I mean, I know the Celtics took them to 7 games in 2018, but, LeBron took care of business in Game 7 at TD Garden. Now in the Western Conference, where there's some other veteran teams out there, it's maybe not as easy. And he's not the same player he was in Cleveland. He's still a top 10 player, which is freaking amazing when you consider
And the
he's just
league
turned
itself,
39
Sap,
years old.
it's not even just the Western Conference. The league itself is just far more talented than it was 10 years ago.
Without question. And now you've got teams that are constructed a little bit better. And like you mentioned earlier in the podcast, you've got Minnesota, Oklahoma City. These teams, I don't know if they're really title contenders, but look what Oklahoma City's done so far this year. 2 wins over Denver, a win over Minnesota, and a win over the Celtics. Can't get much more impressive than that. And that's a young team that's
game out of first,
playing at a very high level. And Minnesota's been there all year. And like we said, Orlando's a tough out in the Eastern Conference. So there's more depth in both conferences than in the past. So now you've got the Lakers as the 10 seed in the West and the Warriors as the 11 seed. So, one of those teams would be on the outside looking in if the season ended today. The thing is with Golden State, in some sense, similar to the Lakers, Steph Curry's still playing at an extremely high level. So Steph Curry, Anthony Davis, and LeBron James are still 3 phenomenal players, and their teams aren't winning as much as you would expect them to because the rosters aren't as deep, and also the secondary players just aren't as good as maybe anticipated. In the case of Golden State, you've had Draymond Green out pretty much for a month.
Right.
When he comes back is anyone's guess. And Klay Thompson looks calcified at this point. He can have like a good game here or there, but he's not the consistent player he used to be. So it falls on Steph Curry, and now you've got a team that's slightly under 500. So both teams, will they make a move at the trade deadline? That's a possibility. And don't be shocked if the Lakers move on from Darvin Ham as their head coach. It's just something that has happened to LeBron James teams in the past. And oftentimes when they do move on from a coach, it works out okay. They moved on from David Blatt to Ty Lue, and they won a championship that year. So it doesn't always backfire that they move on from their current coach.
Yeah, and obviously when you have LeBron, you have the built-in coach. And so it doesn't for I do think coaching matters more than a lot of people, especially people in the media, let on, especially in the playoffs. I think you saw it in the Eastern Conference Finals, really apparent that Joe Mazzulla was getting his pants coached off of him by arguably, the best coach in basketball in Eric Spoelstra. But for LeBron, it's just different. It's a unique circumstance. So if they move on from Darvin Ham, I don't see that will solve anything. I don't think that he's negatively or necessarily positively impacting the team. I think like most coaches who've coached LeBron for the past 10 years of his career, they're just sort of there. That's not to say that they are not necessarily talented. Like Ty Lue, I think is a very good head coach. But when you have a team that LeBron is on, your job is to just kind of be there and answer questions in the press conference, not really to LeBron's doing the game management. So for the Lakers, I would feel if I was a Lakers fan, which is the last thing in the world I would ever be, Sap, I would feel more confident that they can turn it around. With the trade deadline and stuff than the Warriors, who it seems like it's more of an age thing that's really catching up to them. Like you said, Klay Thompson's not nearly the same player he was. Draymond Green isn't the same player he was and can't stay on the court because of his own actions. And then we've talked about this before. They've whiffed on a couple of draft picks that would have given them the opportunity to uh, do sort of what the Spurs did and be relevant for a really long period of time because you're injecting good young players into an already really strong championship level core. We talked about this, I think, one of our last podcasts of the year, Sap. Wiseman, was the number 2 pick in the draft. He barely lasted 2 years in Golden State. They could have had LaMelo Ball, a bunch of other good players. Kuminga is now falling out of the rotation. Moses Moody is upset. So the players that they had the opportunity to add in the draft with a couple of shrewd moves to get higher picks that the Warriors had, they haven't worked out. And so now the Warriors are left with that same championship core, but older versions who are less effective, with the exception of Steph Curry, who's still, like you said, Sap, is playing at an extremely high level.
Yeah, I would think if you look at the two teams, I have more confidence in the Lakers because they have two superstars still playing at a high level. Golden State only has one
Right.
superstar still playing at a high level. So maybe a little bit more room for error for the Lakers. Um, can they go ahead and maybe add that third piece that I think would put them in the top 4 or 5 in the Western Conference? I think they can. Again, DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, someone like that. If Chicago moves on from either of those two players, maybe the Lakers can make that happen. The dollars and cents would have to work, obviously. But if you add a player of that caliber, now those other players will slide down to 4, 5, 6, where I think they belong. And now your bench is that much better and your roster is that much deeper.
Yeah. So I do think that the Lakers, because the exact equation you said there, Sap, they have two guys, 2 all-star, all NBA caliber players versus the Warriors who have one. And if the Warriors want to move on from some of those younger players, Moody, Kuminga, uh, they are not going to be able to get as much that they would have gotten for them in terms of veteran players for them maybe a year or 2 years ago, because now teams have seen them and kind of been able to evaluate them and say, well, they've gotten plenty of opportunities. If they were able to contribute, the Warriors wouldn't be in the situation they are now. So I don't know that those are, high value trade chips anymore. If the Warriors were looking to go get a veteran, I suppose the Warriors could also try to trade Klay Thompson or Draymond Green, but for what and who wants to take them on at this point?
Yeah, I don't think Klay Thompson is very happy there because of his contract situation. But what would you get back in return for what, a 33, 34-year old shooting guard who I think is a future Hall of Famer, but still never really recovered from those catastrophic injuries that he suffered back in 2019, with the knee, the Achilles,
Right.
and then having it happen again with the Achilles. I mean, he was out for well over 2 years, came back, helped them win a championship, was good, not great, in that finals against the Celtics, but he's nowhere near the player he used to be.
Yeah, so I do think the Lakers, it's not doom and gloom for them. Obviously, they're too talented to be in the situation where they are right now, where they're 17 and 18 on the year. And even though Darvin Ham's getting the blame and stuff like that, some of it does have to fall on LeBron, whether he
Sure.
likes that or not. And yet if you look at the All-Star voting, Sap, he's the leading vote getter. Not a surprise. Actually, Giannis is the overall leading vote getter, but LeBron's the leading vote getter in the Western Conference. And he's obviously the most popular player still in the NBA. But overall, Sap, I've this is maybe as I'm getting older, I'm getting more grumpy. I hate fan voting. I just don't like it for All-Star games. I don't think it's representative of who should actually make the All-Star games. I know it's an exhibition game for the fans, so in theory they should pick the players, but there's contracts stuff and legacy stuff tied into it, and I hate fan voting. I think it's a silly way to determine who gets it, and the NBA has made it better where the fan voting only counts as 50%, and the other 50% is made up of the players and the media, but still, I think fan voting is stupid.
Or maybe you could have it a third, a third, and a third. And at times the players seem to know even less than the fans, like maybe they're
Yeah,
not following the
the
only
players
league
are
they play in.
clueless too, or
Yeah, the coaches
biased.
maybe would be better. The media, I think, does overall pretty good job of this. In terms of like MVP voting, first team All NBA, et cetera. I think the media does a fairly good job with that. So, maybe you have a third fan voting, a third media, a third coaches, and then what always happens with this is you have 12 players on each team. They're going back to the East versus the West, which I think is a good decision.
Yeah.
That draft last year just was just nails to chalkboard. It just was way too long, and I think it damaged the sport, if anything. And then, of course, the last pick in the draft turns out to be the best player in basketball, and Nikola Jokic,
Right,
who, by
which
the
was
way,
just
doesn't really
absurd.
well, he doesn't really fit into the All-Star game mode though. Like, remember Tim Duncan would go to the All-Star game and play like 11 minutes and look like
Yeah.
just completely lost out there. That's not what Jokic or Tim Duncan are about. They're not really good in those settings. Russell Westbrook was always good in the All-Star game because he'd play at the same level he did during the regular season, and he just out hustle everyone and put up big numbers. Giannis won an MVP recently doing that. With Jokic and Tim Duncan were two guys that were like out there going, what the hell are we doing out here? This doesn't even feel like basketball. They're such purists in how they play the game. Yeah, I'm glad it's back East versus West. I would go a third fan voting, a third media, and a third coaches. I mean, or if you want to just
It's
go full,
1% fan voting. That's my idea.
well,
1%.
yeah, I mean, you still want to have them involved at some point. How about this? 25% fans, 25% coaches, 25% players, and 25% media. How's that
No,
sound?
still too much for the
Okay.
fans. I
All
don't
right,
trust them.
33% coaches, 33% players, 33% media, 1% fan voting. There you go.
Yeah.
Now you got your
Uh,
wish.
that's
Okay.
how I want it. That's
I'm
exactly.
easy. I'm easy to give in. New Year's
And
resolution. I'm not going to fight with you over things like
thank
that.
you. That's the best way to do it going forward. But yeah, just so you guys are, everybody's aware. Here is how the top five for each position. They do front court and back court for the All Stars. So in the West, LeBron leading court getter, a vote getter, followed by Kevin Durant, Nikola Jokic, Anthony Davis, Kawhi Leonard. In the backcourt, top vote getter right now is Luka Doncic, followed by Steph Curry, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving. How those two are okay. Okay, that's why
Where's
the fans
Anthony
shouldn't have vote.
Edwards?
That's why the fans shouldn't have the vote set
Yeah,
because Kyrie Irving and
I
James
agree
Harden
with you now. My man is not in the top five
ridiculous.
in guards.
In East front court, top five, Giannis is actually currently the overall vote leading person in the NBA with 2,100,000 some and change. And he's followed by Joel Embiid, Jason Tatum, Jimmy Butler, and Jaylen Brown in the front court for the East. In the back court for the East, Tyrese Halliburton, rightfully so, is the top vote getter followed by Dame Lillard, Trae Young, Donovan Mitchell, and Tyrese Maxey. Um, Sap, I know you love LeBron. Should he be the top front court player in the NBA right now?
Based on fan voting, yeah, he's always going to be. I mean, he's the most popular player in the league. But I mean, we can make a case that Anthony Davis has probably had a better year than LeBron,
I would
slightly.
start Anthony Davis and Nikola Jokic would be my two front court guys.
Okay, well, if you're going to use three, would
Well, I
Kevin
guess you have
Durant be
three
the
front
third?
court guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, just because I want to make you upset.
Well, the only thing is LeBron's been more durable than Durant, right? And Phoenix is a little better than the Lakers. So, yeah, it would come down to that. Look, Kawhi Leonard the last month has been among the very best players in the sport. I mean, but again, how many games is he going to miss by the time
He's
we get to the All-Star
Yeah,
game?
he's played
That's a question.
29 games right now, and LeBron's played 32, so it's relatively close. But
Relatively
LeBron's
close,
also
yeah.
averaging more points than him, and
Yeah, I
and
would take
he's going
LeBron
to
over
average more
Kawhi
points.
so far this year.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would too. I
So,
would.
yeah, I got no problem with Davis, Jokic, and LeBron as the starting front court. It comes down to LeBron versus Durant, and I think again LeBron's a little more durable than Durant. And again, he's the most popular player in the league. I mean, it's like people are already pushing back that Patrick Mahomes made the Pro Bowl, which doesn't even mean a thing in
No,
football.
Pro Bowl is
But
stupid.
he's the most popular player in that sport. Of course, he's going to win the fan voting, which represents a fairly high percentage of how the Pro Bowl is selected. So, just get used to that. That
I'm
the most popular
surprised.
player is going to make it.
I'm surprised that in the West front court, even though his team has been god awful, is that I thought Wembayana was going to get a ton of fan voting just
Right.
because of the pure interest in it.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
that surprised me a little. I
Yep.
mean, based off of how his team's played, he's not worthy of being an all-star. He's putting up really good numbers for a rookie, but his team is horrible. So
Yeah.
I have no problem with him not being there. But I'm a little surprised that he's not one of those top vote getters purely because I thought that he would just get a lot of fans.
Yeah, I mean, he came in with more fanfare than any rookie since LeBron James 21 years ago. So absolutely, you would think he'd get more fan support. Also, Kyle Anthony Towns, I think, has played at a very high level for Minnesota. I
Yeah,
mean, best record in the West.
two guys whose name we didn't see in the West, except that surprised me. Actually, I get three guys that surprised me that are all deserving are Devin Booker,
Hmm.
Anthony Edwards, who you mentioned, and De'Aaron Fox, who's averaging
True.
just a shade under 30 points a game. I think are all deserving, and certainly more deserving than Kyrie Irving or James Harden in my mind.
Oh yeah, without question. Neither one of those guys deserves to be even close. I
If you're
mean,
doing a backcourt though for the West Sap, my starters right now would be Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and Luka Doncic. That would
oh,
be
without
who I would
question,
pick.
yeah. And then
And I
your
have
second
Curry come off the
backcourt,
bench.
Curry, Anthony Edwards, and De'Aaron Fox. I mean, it's loaded. I mean, the league is loaded with talent. More talent in this league now than ever. Again, part of it is the way the game is
Yeah, no
played.
more
That now
Jamal
we see.
McGlures making the All-Star game.
No, I mean, or Millsap, who made it with Atlanta a decade ago. Remember, Atlanta
Right.
had four All Stars
Yeah, Kyle
that year. I think
Korver made it.
Jeff Teague and Al Horford. Four Hawks in there, and like, ugh, this has been a really deep roster to say the least. The thing is, the way the game is, scoring 25 points per game is an accomplishment, but it's not what it was even 10 years ago. I think there's something like 37 players in the league or 47 players in the league averaging more than 20 points per game. Like, just the Celtics have three guys doing that, right? Tatum, Brown, and Porzingis. It's just this is what the way the league is. So even when a guy's averaging close to 30, he may not even make the All-Star team because there's so much depth, especially in the backcourt. Now, maybe you expand rosters to 15 per team. So now you have 30 All-Stars. Now it's on the coaches to
Right.
play
Yeah,
players an
that's
average of 16 minutes, and players are going to want to play more than that. Do you expand the game to 60 minutes at a fifth quarter? I don't know. Just a way to get more players involved. I don't know if the All-Star game needs to go to 60 minutes. Just keep it
no,
at 48.
not the way it's been played
No,
recently.
the score would be 300 to 270 by the time you got to the end of the game. Someone might break Chamberlain's record. I mean, it
Yeah.
wouldn't count because it's an All-Star game.
Right.
Heck, Tatum had 55 last year. But maybe you need to expand the rosters a little bit. But there's going to be the injury replacements. And I know we wanted to talk a little bit about Derek White. And look, Derek White's a marvelous player. I don't think he's an all-star because, if we look at the Eastern Conference, those 5 guys you named are all better than Derek White,
Don't,
right?
if you say
Again,
that analytically, Sap, actually he should make the All-Star game. If you're just a pure love
because of his
those
defense,
deep,
especially, right? And his
yeah, if you love
efficiency. Yeah.
those deep numbers, then he is an All-Star.
Yeah.
But not to the if you're just the counting numbers. I no, I mean, I think that there's an argument to be made either way. But quickly, I think that fan voting's stupid. But for the front court, I do think that the fans actually got it right. Giannis, Embiid, and Tatum are the three. I think easy decision for those three to be the guys who are
Oh,
starters in the
sure.
front court for the East.
3 of the top 7 players in the sport.
I
Like, I
don't
mean,
think
I'm not
there's
going
an
to sit.
argument for anybody else, an alternate for
No,
those three.
no. And I know Scotty Barnes was up there for a while, or
Yeah,
someone
what
on
the heck was
ESPN.
that about? That was bizarre.
Who was it on ESPN that had him as a starter
Yeah, it was
ahead of
one of their
Tatum?
analysts. It was
And I love
insane.
Scotty Barnes, but Jason Tatum is at a different level than Scotty Barnes. I mean,
And Tatum's all of his numbers across the board are better, and his team is miles ahead. So it
right.
made no logical sense.
I mean,
Except
don't
for
you
somebody who just
see?
loves the Raptors, I guess.
Maybe someone's a big fan of Masai Ujiri, which we both are. I think he's the best executive in the sport, but that doesn't mean,
I think he just
that
won
he
his
should be.
trade, by the way. I mean, we
Yeah,
haven't
he
even
did.
talked about
He,
that yet.
he he generally does that pretty well. So yeah, Tatum, Embiid, Giannis. That's the front court in the Eastern Conference, and I'd say Halliburton and Maxey could be the backcourt, right? I don't think that there's
So as of
much
right now,
pushback on that.
the backcourt is Halliburton and Lillard. Maxey's
I would
fifth.
go with Maxey over Lillard. I think Maxey's had a
I
better
I
year.
think so. I think Halliburton lock definitely is the top
Yeah,
backcourt player in the East right now. I don't see how you could
he's
make a
averaging
real or
27 and 12
yeah, I don't see how you
for a
could make a
team
real
that's
argument against
fourth in
that.
the conference. Yeah,
And I right now I think Donovan Mitchell's had a better
true.
season than Damian Lillard. I think Trae Young, he plays no defense, but he's had just as good of a season as Damian Lillard. Jalen Brunson's having a really awesome season. Like you said, Maxey. Lillard obviously is the biggest name of that group. And so that's why he's going to get the most fan votes. But outside of Halliburton, I think you could make a really solid argument for a bunch of people to be that second starting guard.
Hmm.
Halliburton, I think, has more than earned it. So keep him where he is. He's rightfully way ahead in the fan vote, which I'm impressed that the fans were able to recognize somebody from the Pacers, for what he is. But yeah, I think that one is way more up for grabs. Do you think, Sap? So right now, the Celtics, would you expect them to put through 2 or 3 guys into the All-Star game?
Definitely Tatum, definitely Brown. Derek White, again, we just named 6 guards because you brought up Jalen Brunson. That's another guy that I think, I put above Derek White. And again, White's having a great year. He's durable. He reminds me so much of Dennis Johnson. In fact, now the Celtics have 2 guys in their backcourt that remind me so much of Dennis Johnson, Drew Holiday, and Derek White. And that's about as big a compliment as I'm going to pay to a player is to compare him to Dennis Johnson. But with the sport so deep and so many players averaging 25 and 27, 28 per game, those guys are going to get the nod as all-stars. Porzingis has missed too many games. I think he's an all-star caliber player. Drew Holiday is taking kind of a secondary role with this team, shows you why he's such a winner and such a smart player. He's come here and realized he doesn't have to score like he did in Milwaukee. He could score 14 a game instead of 19, and he could still be effective for that team. I think definitely 2. It's just when you only have 12 spots in the conference and the talent is so deep, it's going to be tough to put 3 players from any team onto the All-Star team. It's not, again, like the year the Atlanta Hawks had 4 All-Stars. I mean,
Yeah,
the score is
typically,
that much deeper.
right? So typically, the top seeds are virtually guaranteed 2 All-Stars.
Yes.
And often it's a third. So if you were picking a third for the Celtics right now, Sap, who is more deserving, White or Porzingis?
I would say Porzingis. I mean, it just again
Because of the
because I think
position or because of how
because
he's
of the
played?
position. Yeah, I mean, there's more guards than front court guys in the Eastern Conference. I know Porzingis has missed a handful of games where Derek White's as durable as they come. He's also an outstanding defensive player. And do you think the fans would rather watch Porzingis or Derek White? And I love Derek
Porzingis.
White. They'd rather watch
Because
Porzingis. I mean,
they're not
he's
familiar with Derek White.
no, and
Derek White actually plays a very fun brand of basketball because
oh,
he blocks
he's
shots like crazy
fantastic.
for a guard. So, but yeah, I
He's
mean,
fantastic.
it's not often you get to see a 7'3" guy who shoots threes. So
Right. So I think that that would be the third choice. They're both deserving of being all stars. I just don't think they're going to make the all star team because of the numbers.
yeah,
So but Porzingis has a better shot because the front court is not as deep in the Eastern Conference as the backcourt is.
it's sort of the opposite in the West is that the front court is much more loaded than the back court. Though the back court's very good in the West. Again, you're splitting hairs here. There's so many good players in the NBA. But yeah, you can only have a certain finite amount of all stars, and people will opt out or be hurt or something like that. So there is a good chance that the Celtics, I guess, could put a third player in
Mm-hmm.
there potentially. Um, well, that's still in February, so we have a ways, to the All-Star game. But right now, before we wrap up, Sap, there are some non-NBA matters to get to. We wanted to talk a little bit about the national championship in college football. As that is what day is that, Sap? It's on
Monday.
Monday, right? Monday.
Monday night. Yep.
So we got the Washington Huskies against the Michigan Wolverines. Both teams a perfect 14-0 on the season. Unfortunately, two of those 14 wins for Washington came at the expense of my Oregon Ducks. And so, that really drives me crazy. Michigan has seemingly been on a mission all year long with the suspension to Jim Harbaugh at one point in this season, and they came close last season, disappointing in the playoffs. So are you in on this game, Sap? Are you invested at all?
Yeah, I'm rooting for Michigan, and I want to know more about who you're rooting for because you're an Oregon Duck. So do you root against Washington because that's
I
an
can't
Oregon?
can't root for Washington. I can't
Okay,
do
so
it.
you're rooting for Michigan too, so we're on the same side.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to see Michigan win. I'm actually that one guy that likes Jim Harbaugh. I know like a lot of people despise him. I think he's a phenomenal coach. I thought when he was with the 49ers that he was the second best coach in the NFL behind only Bill Belichick. I think he's done a marvelous job at Michigan. Michigan, by the way, is a basketball school first, the football school second. But look at what he's done since he's been there in 9 years. He's now made it to the college football playoff 3 straight years and finally won a game, beating Alabama. I just think that Washington's going to have trouble with Michigan's size. Michigan's built like an old school team, right? Big offensive and big defensive lines. They run the football, physical, tough, hard nosed teams. That's how Harbaugh builds those teams. Washington more of a finesse team. So if Michigan gets that running game going, they might keep Michael Penix off the field and kind of control the clock. And I expect Michigan to win. But what Penix did the other night against Texas was just phenomenal. I mean, he's going to move up the draft board without question. Probably will still be the fourth quarterback drafted, but might be drafted in the top 10. But yeah, I'm rooting for Michigan because I do think that Harbaugh is going to move on. If he wins the national championship, you could see him with the Chargers or any other team that's looking for a guy who I think is a dynamite head coach. And when you talked about his suspension, he was suspended twice this year, the first 3 games and the last 3 games. So
Mm.
what an incredible year by the Michigan Wolverines. But I'm going to root for them because I do like Harbaugh. He's half Italian, so that's part of it too.
Oh, there you go. That's why
Yeah,
that's
that's
why you
that's
like him
all
so
I
much.
need. I don't need much more than that.
Yeah, I can't bring myself to root for Washington. They'll, their fan base is so obnoxious when it comes, because I'm on the message boards and stuff like that too. And if they win, they'll hold it over Oregon's head forever. So I can't do it. It's not like I love this Michigan team or anything like that, but I can't bring myself to root for Washington.
Okay.
I do think Michigan will win. Also, the Washington has been counted out like 30 different times this season and just does not. I mean, they're undefeated. Obviously, they've found a way to win all their games, even when they're the underdogs, and they just seem to find a way to win, and really take slights as motivation, which is a big factor in winning a championship at any level. And Penix is obviously a gamer, and he's somebody that is so experienced. And has actually played against some of these guys on Michigan because he was in the Big Ten before he was in Washington. He
Mm-hmm.
played for Indiana. So maybe he has some familiarity with it. That might be a stretch, but I do think Michigan will win. But I definitely think it will be a close game, unlike last year's national championship game, which was just an absolute joke. As Georgia just rolled over TCU, and it wasn't not even entertaining at all. So hopefully we get a much better game this year. Sap, last question before we wrap up is another football question. I know we're a basketball show, but we also pay attention to other things too. Um, Last final week of the regular season in the NFL. Bill Belichick coaching against the Jets. Last game as Patriots head coach, yes or no?
Yes. I think they're going to move on from him. And I think it's time to move on from him, go in a different direction. I think he still wants to coach. At this current time, he's 15 wins away from breaking Don Shula's record for most coaching wins in league history. If he wins on Sunday, he'll knock it down to 14. If he goes to a franchise that has talent, has a quarterback, he should be able to eclipse that record in 2 years. I wrote a column 3 years ago on Full Press Coverage that the Chargers made a lot of sense because they have a quarterback in Justin Herbert, a talented roster. They just need a coach who can get them buttoned up and headed in the right direction. I think that would be a good spot for him. I don't know if Bill Belichick wants to move to the West Coast. Seems more like an East Coast guy, but I think it's time to
Well, he
move
likes his
on.
boat.
He does like his boat, the one that's named 8 rings, the only coach in NFL history that gets credit as a defensive coordinator. Because if we're going to do that, I want George Seifert to have a boat that says 5 rings. Because Seifert was the defensive coordinator for 3 Super Bowl winning teams in San Francisco, then became the head coach in San Francisco to win 2 Super Bowls. So Seifert should have a boat 5 rings if Belichick has a boat named 8 rings. But
Okay.
I do think that he's going to still coach next year. He wants that record. I think he can still be a good in-game coach. He just can't run the entire program. His drafting has been horrible. Building his coaching staff has been horrible. I think he can still coach, game plan, do all of those things, send him to a place, or he'll go to a place that's ready-made to win. And I think the Chargers make an awful lot of sense. And what I'd like to see the Patriots do, and I am the one man with a plan here, Jet, I
Okay.
want to see Gerard Mayo as president of football operations, not head coach, president of
Oh,
football operations.
oh
I
boy.
want Adam Peters, who's the assistant general manager in San Francisco, to be the general manager. He was
Okay.
here 15 years ago as an area scout. And I want Jed Fish, who was here as a quarterback coach in 2020. In the last 3 years, has turned around the University of Arizona to be the next head coach of the Patriots.
That'd be a huge blow to Arizona football, who are just coming off of
Mm.
a big bowl win too. Phew, man, that's a lot of moving parts. Sap, is there any chance Belichick's back?
Very, very, very slight. I mean, they're going to have a meeting, Belichick with Robert Kraft and Jonathan Kraft on Monday. Maybe if he goes in hat in hand and says, look, I made mistakes this year. Here's what I want to do to rectify things. Give me one more chance. I'll right these wrongs. But Bill Belichick doesn't strike me as a guy who's going to go in and admit his wrongdoings, apologize. I think Kraft has pretty much made up his mind. I don't think he wants to pull the trigger. Kraft loves to be loved. And at 82, 83 years old, do you want to start fresh with a new coach? If it was Jonathan Kraft's decision, Bill Belichick would have been gone years ago
Yeah,
because
not they're
those two
not
guys do not
don't
like
like
each
each
other
other. Yeah.
at all. But still,
One of
Robert
the
Kraft
worst
is
kept
the owner.
secrets in the New England area.
Oh, man, I was told 10, 11 years ago that if Jonathan Kraft was running the Patriots, Belichick would probably last about 10 minutes. And I think he was opposed to Belichick's treatment of his own dad because we saw in A Football Life, which was recorded back in 2009. Just I can't get this out of my head that before a game it was snowing out. I think it was the Tennessee win in 2009, and Belichick was sitting at his desk and Kraft was in his office asking him about the weather. And Belichick looked at Kraft like I would look at a piece of gum on the bottom of my sneaker, and I'm like, Kraft's the owner. Belichick's the coach.
uh,
You talk to the owner like that. I think that did sit well with Jonathan Kraft. Is much more emotional than Robert Kraft. So if Jonathan has his way, I'm sure
yeah.
Belichick will be gone. But I think there's not much of a chance that Belichick's back in 2024.
Well, we'll talk about it next week, regardless of
Yeah.
what happens. We'll bring that up too. Plenty more basketball stuff to talk about too. But thanks for listening, everybody. Again, this is the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Go check out their website. Check us out on social media at JohnSap25 at Jet Stryer, and we will talk to you next week with a new pod. Happy New Year again, everybody. See ya.